Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What Is True. Um, we're going to be talking, not we're going to be talking with, or reading, I should say, about a particular chapter in Gerlad Massey's book here. These are part of his lectures. The title of the chapter is called "The Devil in Darkness, or Evil and Light of Evolution." And thank you for being here. I wish you a good day. And so let's get into the reading here of Gerlad Massey. Um, Again, this chapter is part of this particular book I have here on the interlibrary loan I have actually. And it's like the mid part of the chapter, mid part of the book here. There's plenty still here. So we're going to try to get through this particular chapter today. So thanks. So this is talking about the Fuller Egyptian and Gnostic data with reference to authorities may be found in the author's not national, but Nature's Genesis. And so we're going to start here and begin our reading. There are two things which I have come to look upon to constituting the unpardonable, what I say, unpardonable sin of the father and mother against the helpless innocence of infancy. The one is allowing their little children to run the risk of blood poisoning, such as was once suffered by a child of mine from the filthy fraud of vaccinations. The other is in permitting the mind and soul of the children to be inoculated with the still more fatal virus of the old, that is, the false, the orthodox dogmas and delusions, by allowing them to believe that the fables of ancient mythology are the sacred and solely true Word of God. That is actually, Word of God is actually in quotes. If they are found in the Hebrew scriptures, the one book of the religiously ignorant generation after generation, we learn, unlearn, and relearn the same lying, legendary lore, and it takes the latter half of all of our lifetimes to throw off the mask of corrupting error instilled into us during the earlier half, even when we do break out and slock it off in the mental eruption and have to find ourselves in utter rebellion against things as they are. Unfortunately, the mass of people never do get rid of this infection, nor is the desire to give their disease to others. No, I'm sorry, nor are the desire to give their disease to others. You know, the spreading of the false teachings of the literal Bible. The fact of the matter is, the Christian dogmas and doctrines began as such with being unintelligible and inexplicable. They were to remain as mysteries, and any true explanation of them is deaf to their false pretensions. It is my method to explode by explaining them. Take the doctrine of the Trinity, for example. Can any theologian throughout all Christendom today give us any intelligible account of its origin and primary meaning? Not one. For that, we must go to mythology, which was earlier than our theology, and which alone enables us to explain its primal mysteries. The natural genesis of the Trinity was found and is to be refound in lunar phenomenon. The moon in mythology and chronological was a time measurer of a threefold nature. At 15 days of age or a full moon, it was the mother moon, hence Ishtar. And AKKAD is designated as goddess. The lessening or waning moon was her little one, the child of the moon, who became the virile one, that is the adult, as the horned new moon, the reproducer who was fable to re-beget himself or the other moon, and thus become his own father as a natural mode of describing natural phenomenon. These three are eternal one in eternal nature, a trinity always manifesting monthly, and the trinity aspect was humanly or naturally expressed by means of the mother, child, and reproducing male, which three are also one in the total human being. In the Christian iconography, you will sometimes see the Virgin Mary enthroned in the new moon with the child in her arms. And these two, with the horned or phallic moon, constitutes the Christian Trinity in unity. Such was the primal mode of thinking, and things afterward continue in a mystical or doctrinal phase. Such I affirm to be the origins of the Trinity in mythology which preceded religion, and when this is applied abstractly to the nature of deity or to mind in nature by means of metaphysics, the result is an imposition, and he or she who practices imposition consciously or not is an imposer. No such thing can be known as a triune or triangular God, but we are able to show how such types originated. That is, when our words are examined, we shall frequently find that our metaphysics has been extracted or falsely filtered, or flinched, I should say, from primal or primeval physics, as well as was the Trinity by Plato, which was continued by the Christian fathers who tell us that, but for Plato, they would never have understood the doctrine of the Trinity. As with the Trinity, so it is with the origins of theological, what we call the devil. The crucial question of the savage man, Friday, was too fundamentally for the theology of Robinson Crusoe. Friday asks, but if God, quote, but if God much mighty as the devil, why God no kill the devil and so make him no more wicked, end quote. Crusoe, initiating other theologians, not knowing what to say, quote, pretended not to hear him, end quote. And then actually in brackets here, he says, I am told this passage has been omitted from certain recent editions. To give an answer to that question, we shall have to go round to work. It would never do to begin a lecture on this subject like the well-known chapter headed, quote, Snakes in Iceland, end quote, which consisted of the statement, quote, there are no snakes in Iceland, end quote. If I did, my lecture might be summed up in the words, quote, there is no devil, end quote. But every belief, superstition, and mental type has its natural genesis once, the devil included. The results of 14 years research in the records of the past is a personal conviction that the human mind has long suffered eclipse and been darkened and dwarfed in the shadow of ideas, the real meaning of which has been lost to the moderns. Myths and allegories, whose significance was once unfolded to the initiatives in the ancient mysteries, have been adopted in ignorance. In other words, people were taught this and they were never told anything else. You see, believe it, just believe what we're talking about, because they didn't have the answer either, you see. And reissued as real truths divinely vouchsafed to mankind for the first and only time when found in the Hebrew writings. The earlier religions had their myths interpreted by means of the oral and unwritten wisdom. We have our misinterpreted, and a great deal of what has been imposed upon us as God's direct truth and sole revelation to man is a mass of mass of inverted myths under the shadow of which men have been covering as timorously as birds in the stubble when a kite in the shape of a hawk is held hovering overhead to help to keep them down. As I've seen it practiced in England, The parables and types of the primordial thinkers have been elevated to the sphere, end quote, as the quote hawk, end quote, or hawk or serpent, end quote, the bull, end quote, or the crab, end quote, that gives names to certain groups of stars, and we are precisely in the same relationship to these religious parables and allegories as we should be to astronomical facts. If we thought that the serpent and bull, lion, sea goat, and ram were real animals up in heaven instead of constellations with symbolic names. The Jews picked up various traditions of other races. Moses, they tell us, was a initiative in all the learning of the Egyptians, and these myths have been so handled as to efface their primordial features altogether. They have been so, quote, sweated, end quote, down by later theologians to make capital, get gold dust, as it were, out of them, that they can only be recognized by comparison with the earlier copies yet extinct among others nations from which the Jews derived their versions. Fossils remain, fossil remains found in the lowermost strata of human thought have been preserved as divine patterns for the ignorant and superstitions of later ages. The simple realities of the earlier times were expressed by signs and symbols, and these have been taken and applied to later thought and converted into theological problems and metaphysical mysteries, for which our theologians have no basis whatsoever, and can only wrangle over in there. They cannot touch solid earth with one foot when they want to kick opponents with the other. And when they try to bite you very viciously, they fight that they have only been furnished with a set of teeth that are false. The only possible way of exposing the false pretensions of theological dogmas is by explaining them from the root and showing what they meant as mythos. The Orthodox teachings, which is founded on the quote fall of man, end quote, is shattered, even as a pane of glass is fractured as a blow, when once we can apply the doctrine of development. The Hebrew devil or Satan means the opponent or adversary, and the first great natural adversary recognized by primitive man was darkness, simply darkness, the constant and eternal enemy of the light. That is, the power of darkness was literal before it became metaphorical, moral, or spiritual. Hence, darkness itself was the earliest devil or adversary. You see, man didn't have the way of actually even fires at that time. You see, didn't understand even how to develop that, build a fire, so to speak. The instructor and deluder of man, the eternal enemy of the sun, S-U-N. We speak of the, quote, jaws of darkness, end quote. And darkness was the vast, huge swallower of the light, night after night. We know this was identified as the primary power because the primal or early man reckoned time by nights and the years by eclipses. This mode of reckoning was first and universal. So many dark preceded so many days. The dark power is primarily in all the oldest traditions and cults of the human race. Hence, sacrifice was first offered to the powers of darkness. The forewords of universal mythology are, quote, there was darkness, end quote. All was dark at first within the mind, and the all was the darkness that created dread without. The influence of night, the eclipse, and the black thundercloud being first felt. The primitive man visibly emerges from the shadow of darkness as deeply impressed and indelible dyed in mind as was his body with its natural blackness. The black man without was they grow within as the reflections remain in the mirror of mythology. The darkness then in natural phenomenon was the original devil that put out the light by swallowing it incessantly as the subtle enemy, the instructor, deluder, and general adversary of man. The first form of the devil was female, called the dragon of darkness, who was Tiamat in Akko, Akkad, and Typhon in Egypt. Typhon gave birth to Sut, S-U-T, who became the Egyptian devil, that is, our Satan, and who was represented by the black jackal, the voice of darkness, and Sut, the black one, gives us the name of Sut, S-O-O-T, the black thing. The Angro-Manius, the Persian devil, was the black one of the two powers of light and darkness. Primitive man, however, did not imagine or personify a devil behind visible phenomenon that caused the darkness. Darkness itself was the devil, and even as late as the Parsi Bunad Hish, which means the aboriginal creation, eternal darkness is the devil. The seven devils, or seven heads of the old dragon in Akkadian myths of creation, are born in the mountains of sunset, which shows the same natural genesis and physical phenomenon. They had their birthplace where the sun went down, at the same place in the west. The Egyptians stationed the great crocodile that swallowed down the lights, the sun, the moon, and stars as they set each night in its wide open jaws of darkness. Hence, the crocodile was an ideogram of the swallowing of darkness and of earth, or the waters below, called the abyss. And the tail of the crocodile remained in the Egyptian hieroglyphs as a sign of Kam, K-A-M, that is, of blackness or darkness. The crocodile was the typical dragon of the waters below, the old Typhon, as the serpent was of the waters or overwhelming darkness. Above Hor, Apollo tells us the Egyptians represented the mouth by a serpent because the serpent is all mouth. This was another figure of the swallower, as the Akehe and the Apat serpent, Aheke, signifies darkness, and Apat means that which rises up vast and gigantic. In short, the monster, the typical Apat, being based on the great African rock snake. Here, then, is the reason why the mythical dragon and the old serpent are identical or interchangeable in mythology, each being a representative of the devil of darkness and of Satan, that old serpent, who imagined the evil which was first perceived in physical phenomenon. Out of the darkness leapt the lightning bolt, and in the deep waters lurked another subtle foe of life, and thus the jaws, the fang, and the sting of death were assigned to the devil of darkness, who gradually assumed the character of man's mortal enemy that brought death into the world. The course of this development can be traced from the beginning in physical darkness to the culmination in a psycho-theistic phase, where everything yields to an application of the evolutionary method, and you may depend upon it that evolution has come into the world to stay. And evolution and the Hebrew Genesis cannot coexist in the same mental world. The earliest mode of representing the eternal alternation of external phenomena called night and day, or darkness and light, the good and bad, is to be found in the universal myth of the two brothers who are born twins, very imperfect versions of which may be found in the legends of Cain and Abel and of Esau and Jacob. In this myth, the dark and day are both twins of the great mother, and these brothers are portrayed as always being at enemy with each other and in conflict before their birth, as are the darkness and the light when struggling at dawn. They fight one another in the effect of each to get born first. This becomes the well-known struggle of the birthright, which is universal in mythology. For more perfect versions of the same mythos are extant among the blacks of Australia, the Red Indians of America, the Bushmen, and the Hottentots of Africa, more perfect because simpler, nearer to nature, and less moralized. It is the myth of Sun Horus in Egypt. I said Sun Horus. I meant to say Sut, S-U-T, Horus in Egypt. Sut Horus is the dual manifester of dark and light, who is depicted with the double head of the black vulture and night of night and the golden hawk of light upon one body. That is, the dark one was born first, because darkness was first condemnized. But they both continue to struggle for supremacy after birth, as they have done before it, because they dramatize the ceaseless and endless alternations of night and day, of dark and light, seen in the heavens at eve and dawn in the orb of the moon, and the lengthening of darkness or light in autumn and in spring. Here again, the dark power is the devil, the bad Dev, and the light of the good power, the bright Dev, DEV. The same conflict based upon the alternation of light and darkness is portrayed as the struggle of St. George, our solar hero, who conquers the dragon just as Horus overthrows the Apex dragon upon the monuments of Egypt. And when the devil knelt, is rung annually at Horbury, that is Horbury, in Yorkshire, England, that is the celebration of the death of the dragon of darkness. And the same custom is also continued in ringing out the old year on the last day, or last night, I should say, of December. When in New South Wales, I picked up a tradition of the blacks. The devil called Mullin, Mullion, lived in a very tall tree at Girra, Girra, on the Barwon River, and used to eat black fellows. They tried to burn down this vast tree in which the devil of darkness dwelt, but the fires were always put out by invisible spirits. Then they got a red mouse, put a lighted straw on his mouth, and started him up the tree. The loose bark caught fire. The tree blazed for weeks. The devil was burned out and never came back again. The red mouse is also a type of Horus in Egypt. Naturally, then, the devil of darkness was the first divinity, because the dark power is primal. When it came to worshiping, or rather to propitiation by offering the fruits of fear, it was the dark power that predominated, because this struck terror and elicit fear. Quote, promise in orbit Deus Vici Timor, end quote. Sometimes these twins of darkness and light are called the ugly and beautiful brothers, and here the persistence of the mythical type may be noticed, for these two are not only continue as the sun Sut Horus, or double Horus of Egypt, but they are likewise extant in that museum of mythical types, the catacombs of Rome, as the twin Christ, one of which is portrayed as the beautiful youth, the other is the little, old, and ugly Christ, just as it was in the pre-Christian times, from which these figures were a Gnostic survival. Next, mind becomes the element of the manifestation of phenomenon, and in the American myths, the born twins are called the bad mind and the good mind. In the phrase, the twin brothers are not only mental, they are also mortalized on their way to becoming the dual divinity of modern God and devil. In the Avesta and other Persian scriptures, for example, the twin brothers can be traced from the natural genesis in phenomena as light and darkness to their becoming personified as divinity and devil in Ahura Mazda, the god of mental light, and Mayos, the devil of mental darkness. Here the older bogey of the night had been found out. Men had dipped into the dark and suffered from the shadow of eclipse so long and passed through them so often and so sadly. Not so safely, that their essential unreality was discovered at last. Thus, Angro Manius, the black mind, is only accredited with the creation of all that is untrue, unreal, and utterly delusional in nature. The light had now become the enduring reality, and darkness is only in its deluding shadow. They now recognize that the dark one in the physical, mental, or moral domain was only negative and negation. The bright one, the God of light, the good mind, was the supreme being, the reality, therefore the author of all that was finally real and eternal true. These are the two causes of the universe, it is said. They were united from the beginning and therefore are called the twins. And the Persian, quote, revelation contains the Gnostics and explanation of the doctrine concerning these twin spirits. Such was the natural origin of the doctrine of duality, which is discussed nowadays as a metaphysical mystery, and as it were a reality from the root of it, made known to the world by direct revelation, the origins of good and evil in the nature of man considered as being of flesh and spirit, as the personal embodiment of two opposite principles, assumed to have a spontaneous or automatic tendency towards good on the part of the one which is supposed to originate in the spirit and the other to originate in the flesh as a natural antagonist, is traceable to this most primitive interpretation of the duality called good and evil in an external phenomenon, which was continued in the mental and moral, and lastly in the psychotheistic phase of thought. In its latest stage, the doctrine is destructive of individual responsibility in man and of personal unity in deity or the operating intelligence. There was no revelation, no new point of departure in phenomena, nothing added to nature or human knowledge in those latter views of mythology into metaphysical philosophy or theology, in which the supposed revelation of newer truth was largely found on a falsification of the old. We are not only contemporaries of savage men in many of our current customs and banal beliefs, we are also the victims of its leavings, various of our superstitions being the primitive hideousness that still survives in the last stages of perversion. But now for development of the devil. In Egypt, the old devil of darkness at Sut Typhon or Sevel, the crocodile-headed divinity, acquired a soul in the stars and placed it in heaven. As Plutarch says, to him was given the crocodile or dragon constellation in the planetosphere, whose casting out of heaven is described in the book of Revelation and in the Persian Bahman Yassi, where Sut or Sevela, I should say, the dragon, that old serpent, is identified as Satan, the eternal adversary of souls, just as it is in the Egyptian ritual of the dead. Thus, the devil that first rose up in revolt as the natural darkness called the dragon of the deep, the rebel against the light god, was gradually transformed into a supposed starry or spiritual being, the vice dei of the dark, who in the Christian scheme is still considered to be the supreme power of the two, or if their dominions to be equally divided. He is supreme below and the light God above, just as it has been from the beginning. And finally, our theology has made the primal shadow of physical phenomena substantiated in the mental sphere, and from the external darkness of that beginning, extracted and internalized the modern devil in the end. I have now given you a sample of what I meant by our being in the shadow of ideas whose original significance we have not understood. There is no devil such as Milton saw, and as you must know, most current theology has been derived from, quote, paradise lost, end quote. The hawk that had been flying or flown to keep timid souls crowing down to the ground is not the real bird of prey after all. You may trace every motion of it to the end of a string held in a puller's hand, you see. When you go close up to it, the devil of theology is not alive. It is a bogus bugbear, hideous but harmless as that scarecrow in the field, the impostor, which has been found out and despised by a small bird who has built its nest and laid and hatched its eggs in one of the grim monster's waistcoat pockets. We have an old saying that the devil is a ass, but in Egypt, the devil as such, or Satan, was the ass that carried the Christ as Horus, the Savior. That was the ass that was figuratively kicked out in the Christian sport of, quote, beating the ass, end quote, when that pastime used to be practiced up down the aisles of Christian churches, and the priest used to pray 3 times, and the people responded like asses. The German devil was at one time the red-bearded thunder, the voice of darkness, which takes us back to Sut Typhon, who, as Plutarch informs us, was of a reddish complexion. It is common for our giants to be endowed with a red, streaming comet tail of a beard. Our forefathers, the Norsemen, had little respect and no reverence for the devil, and as to hell, why? If you did not get to heaven, then hell was the next best place in the other world, if there were but two. To be sure, they were badly off for firewood in the Norse hell, and spirits sat shivering in the presence of the cold, uncomfortable goddess Hela, Hela, who was blue with cold, and it was it was trying to think how they were keeping it up overhead, they who had climbed to the top of the tree. Uh, Eudressia or secured a seat in Valhalla, where the wine cups flowed and the faggots flared, and the merry dancing flames might be reflected on the windows of a heaven that once was closed against them. For the Northmen knew nothing of a hell of everlasting fire. If they had, it might have proved their more attractive place of the two, as one of our missionaries once discovered. He had gone out to Greenland to carry the quote, gospel of good tidings and illustrated it with the aid of eternal fire. But he found himself in the wrong latitude as regards the effect of fire. He pictured it in the warmest colors and was surprised as a result. Instead of seeing awe and terror whitening their faces or the tears trickling down them as he had expected, they were blubbering in quite another fashion. The whales' fat began to run and glisten on their relaxed face, which he saw rounding and brightening into full moons of happiness and jollity. Instead of wringing their hands at the prospects he had pictured, they set as if spiritual warning them at this, quote, everlasting bonfire, end quote, that was so earnestly warranted never to go out. If this were the gospel of good tidings, why had they not heard the glorious truth before? Such a welcome and delightful change from the life they had lived in their inclement wintry climate, I should say. They had never dreamed of conditions so delightful, so far from shunning such a place forever, as he desired them to do. They were quite ready and willing, all of them, to go to it at once and stay there forever. The mythical devil was pretty much dying out until it was revived, and some limited by the theology of Luther, Calvin, and Milton. The Roman Church did not deify the devil as the Protestants have done. She was better acquainted with the tradition of his creation and the earthly nature of his character. It was her cue to keep dark. And the devil of the Middle Ages is a poor devil enough without grandeur or terror, a very fallen intelligence indeed, whom Romish saints can tweak by their nose with red-hot tongues, or the simplest countrymen have cunning enough to outwit. Instead of the arch enemy of God and man, majestic in his dark divinity, infernally inspired as Milton pictures him, he has become a grotesque image. The storyteller, most popular figure of fun, on a par with the giants of our nursery lore, whom the clever, redoubtable little Jack always gets the better of. Indeed, both devil and giant, as well as the serpent and dragon, had one origin, and the Orthodox Satan is, after all, the popular monster of mythology. Luther and Calvin double the devil and place one at each of their scheme, and place one at each end of their scheme of things. The upper or brighter God, or bright God, being rather the worst devil of the two. You heard that right. The upper or bright God being rather the worst devil of the two. They put the doctrine of dualism as perplexingly as did the Negro preacher who told his congregation there was but two roads open to them. One of them led directly to destruction, and the other went straight to perdition. Quote, "Stop a bit, brother," end quote, cried one of the congregation. Quote, "Hold hard while I get out of this," end quote. And there are many people who desire to become followers of that Negro and, quote, "get out of this," end quote. The Satan of sacerdotal belief then is not a being for God or man to kill, but an effigy in shoddy that only wants to be ripped up to show you that it is stuffed with sawdust. Some people may cry out in the agony of earnestness, as Charles Lamb stammered in his fun, quote, "But this is doing away with the devil. Don't deprive me of my devil," end quote. We, quote, here's another quote, "We hope for better things. How shall we be able to force people into thinking as we do and frighten them into our fold of fate for the glory of God if we have no devil for our ferocious shepherd dog," end quote. And there is no doubt but that in giving up the Orthodox hell and ancient devil, we are losing one of the most potent motive powers. Our difficulty is how to find a substitute for the appeal to selfish fear. The fact remains that the devil is a fundamental part of the Christian scheme. No devil, no redeemer. And those who will yell at me and call me a blasphemer know that well enough. I sympathize with them. They begin to see dimly what we see clearly, that Orthodox Christianity is answerable with its life for the literal truth of those stories of the devil, the fallen man, and the doctrine of a dying deity atonement. Its life is staked upon the stories being true, and its life must pay the forfeit of their being found to be false. And false they are, however, their defenders may squirm and wriggle, and until the backbone of all mankind is changed into cato. I can imagine that people who are not sure of their own souls, whether they are lost or are not yet found, unless their Hebrew Genesis be true, will feel the world is a rather hollow affair without their accustomed devil. See, they've gotten used to this whole adversary thing here, and so what he's pointing out simply is people are wanting that. You see, they want to use that on other people. You see, they want to use fear, and also to see themselves as better than others is what I'm seeing. Also, that they're now the light, so to speak. It will be light depriving them of half their heaven on earth and the whole of it hereafter to take away the devil. What on earth or in another place will they do? Those who are so violent by nature for the Calvinistic sulfur. That's sulphur, sulphur. If after all there is no brimstone there, and they have passed out of this life with their itch for hell red hot upon them, and there is no old scratch to console them after all. One would like to believe in just a very little hell for their dear sake. They have so devoutly believed in a big one for ours. There is a devil enough, however, only of another kind than the one we have played with. We have talked of the devil long enough, but to a spiritualist, for instance, the devil exists for the first time in some of the facts made known by modern spiritualism. Facts which are as much matter of personal experience and constant verification to myself and merits of others as are those of your ordinary life. Think for a moment tenderly of there being a personal motive on the other side, a vested interest in our wrongdoing. Degraded spirits present with us in the enjoyment of our most secret sins, the ghosts of old dead drunkards haunting the drinker's live, warm atmosphere, because in that there may pass off into a spirit world some ghastly gust of the old delirious delight, and you may get at rest. Sorry, you may get at a real present self-interest, manifold, tempting devil that altogether surpasses the mythology monster of theology. The devil and hell of my creed consist in that natural nemesis which follows on broken laws and dogs the lawbreaker, in spite of any belief of that his sins and their inevitable results can be so cheaply sponged out as he had been misled to think. Through the shedding of innocent blood, nature knows nothing of the forgiveness for sin. She has no rewards or punishments, nothing but causes and consequences. For example, if you should contact a certain disease and pass it on to your children and their children, all the alleged forgiveness of God will be of no avail if you cannot forgive yourself. Ours is the devil of heredity, working in two worlds at once. Ours is a far more terrible way of realizing the hereafter, when it is brought home to us in concrete fact, whether in this life or the life to come, than any abstract idea of hell or devil can afford. We have to face the facts beforehand. No use to whine over them infinitely afterwards when it is too late. For example, in the olden days when immortals to earth came visibly down, there went a youth with an angel through the gate of an eastern town. They passed a dog by the roadside, where dead and rotting in it laid, and the youth at the ghastly odor sickened and turned away. He gathered his robes about him and hastily hurried thence, but not annoyed the angel. Clear, pure, immortal sense, by came a lady, lips Lucius, on delicate mincing feet. All the place grew clad with her presence, all the air about her sweet, for she came in fragrance floating, and her voice most silverly rang, and the youth to embrace her beauty with all his being sprang, a sweet, delightsome lady. And yet the legend saith, the angel, while he passed her, shuddered and held his breath. Only thing of this fine lady who is in this life has been wooed and flattered, sumptuously clad and delicately fed, for whom the pure, sweet air of heaven had to be perfumed as incense, and the red rose of health had to fade from many young human faces to blossom in the robe she wore, and every sense has been most daintily feasted, and her whole life summed up in one long thought of self, thinking of her finding herself in the next life a spiritual leopard, a walking pestilence, a personified disease, a sloughing sore of this life which the spirit has to get rid of, an excrement of this life selfishness at which all good spirits stop their noses and shudder when she comes near. Don't you think if she realized that as a fact in time, it would work more effectively than most preaching? The hell of the drunkard, the Labirius, the bloodthirsty or gold greedy soul, they tell us, is the burning of the old devouring passion which was not quenched by the chills of death. The crossing of the cold, dark river even was only as the untasted water to the consuming thirst of Tantus. In support of this, evolution shows the continuality of ourselves, our desires, our passions, and characters. As the Egyptians said, whoso is intelligent here will be intelligent there. And if we haven't mastered in this discipline our lower passions here, they will be master of us for the time being hereafter. There is no such possibility as deathbed salvation, no such thing as being, quote, jerked to Jesus, end quote, if you are converted on the scaffold. These old passions of ours burn and will and most burn until they burn out. that they tell us it is absolutely necessary, a process of the spiritual world, as it in the case of a fever in the physical world. I'm sorry, the physical body, which may be fed frightfully by the impurities of the previous life. Moreover, the fever will rage so long as it's supplied with fresh fire, with fresh fuel. So long as the infatuated spirit does not try to put out the fire and give the spiritual nature its one chance of throwing off the infernal disease, but lusts and imagination after that which fed the flame at first and stirs the fire that kindles with each side for the old flesh pots of evil passion still, and will come back to earth to prowl in filthy places and snuff the ill odors of the lowest animal life, seeking in vain for some gust of satisfaction in shadowy apparatus as a spirit earthbound and spirit and self-bound to earth, such as the teaching inculcated by our facts, accept or reject them whosoever may. For where the treasure is, there will the heart be also. Think of that. You treasure seekers in the earth who have found and laid your treasures on the earth, whose treasures represent the life you have spent on the earth. You have put the better part of your life into them. They are your better part, but you cannot take them away with you. The only treasure we can carry away with us must be laid within. Now, spiritualism reveals the possibility of the spirit being doomed to haunt this treasure house of earth until every parcel of that horrid wealth has been redistributed and restored to the channels for which it was intended by the Maker. And the first stage on its way back may be that the riches so carefully gathered and misery guarded shall be the means of sinking your spindrift son down to the lowest range of spiritual penalty. For the Creator whom we postulate will not be balked in carrying out his purposes by any temporary obstructions like those. And if you have hindered here, you will have to help hereafter when you do at last give into line with natural law. You have been amused with a dolly devil long enough, while it's inside of you and outside of you and all around about you, the real devil is living, working with a most infernal activity and playing the very devil with this world of ours. Not an ideal devil, but a legal devil with a purpose and plan, the devil in reality. We have been following a phantom of faith, and the actual veritable devil has been dogging us indeed. This is not a Satan or God making, not an archangel ruined, who in falling found a foothold on this earth for the purpose of dragging men down with him to that lower depth or lower deep for which he is bound, but a devil to be recognized by his likeness to ourselves. The devil that is our worser self, the devil of our own ignorance and the deification of self, a devil bequeathed to us by the accumulated gains of centuries of ignorant selfishness and selfish ignorance, a devil to be groped with and wrestled with and throttled, overthrows and overcome and put out of existence. Not only in the struggle against all that is evil in this isolated individual life, our devil has grown into big and is too potent for that, but by the energies of all collective and clubbed and made cooperative to destroy the causes of evil whensoever and wheresoever these can be identified, whether as religious or political, moral or social. We stand in the heaven's own light and cast the evil shadow of self and say it is the devil. And then our theologians have the blaspheming impudence to make God the author of this dark shadow of ourselves, which we shed on his creation and assume it to be a eclipse from another world of being. No doubt it may be shown that the operation power we postulate is responsible for certain natural conditions which inevitably result in what we recognize to be evil. Nor will he shirk his responsibility in that matter. It was a necessary part and process in the human education, in strict accordance with the laws of evolution, But we see more and more every day that such evil was good in the making. We may trace many of the healing springs of heavenly purity filtering through this dark stratum of earth. Also, we are apt to look on these, look on them, look on thens, things, I should say, at first sight as evil, which we finally find to be blessings in disguise. A piercing vision will perceive the deeper underlying intentions of good working upward through many a superficial appearance of evil. Seen in the light of evolution, the existence of evil is no longer a mythological masked mystery to be made the most of by pious ignoramuses or preaching purposes, but a necessary concomitant of development, one of the condition by means of which we grow into conscious human beings to attain the higher life. So what he's talking about simply is that, I'm just going to break this little summary here. Basically, most people are unconscious. They're not even aware of what's going on in their lives. The reason why, they don't have knowledge, they don't understand what's going on here on this planet. So this is, until you become a conscious person, you see, you attain the higher life, so to speak. Now, that's just, that's not, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. But the idea simply is, I've said, people said, what is sin? Well, sin is simply is unconsciousness. That's what it is. You're not aware of what's going on. You lack knowledge. You lack wisdom. You lack ability, you see. You're not seeking the higher things. You're not pursuing the deeper things, so to speak. That's what it means. It doesn't mean always simply is that someone shoots someone and kills them, or aborts a baby, or does something of that nature. Yeah, there's a bad things. Yes, I grant, but that's the point. Simply is that he's talking about something much deeper, because you've been given a brain, you've been given much, and most people don't use that. You see, indeed, whether there be a God or not, it was impossible to discuss the matter intelligently until the doctrine of creation by the slow process of evolution had been taken into account. This shows us that the evil for which nature is responsible is a means of evolving in us the very consciousness of good. The moment we recognize the evil and have acquired the consciousness of existence, the responsibility for existence becomes ours. You get it? You see what he's saying here? You see, when you become, is your responsibility then to become, to do your thing. You need to grow up. You see, that's your responsibility. Don't wait for some miracle to happen. You see, here is a problem set for us to solve by way of education. Here's a foe to fight to the death, whether as a misguided passion in the individual or a disease in the life of a nation. Here is something to be turned into good, a devil to be converted. The moment man sees so far, he must accept the responsibility for the continual existence of evil. All of us, folks, look around you, and war against it as it would if cleaning any other jungle from poisonous reptiles. Ours is not a doll to dangle and claim divine parentage for, but a misbegotten devil of ignorance and a miscarriage of humanity in the past. We see that life comes into visible being according to conditions where these are unprepared and not humanized. The life takes the lowest forms. Those are reptiles and weeds and poisonous plants, thorns, thistles, and briars, forms intimately to man and therefore considered to be evil. Then man comes to cultivate and modify and turn the evil into good. The whole world of natural evil has to acknowledge its master. Let me give you an illustration. Pain, for example, is a consequence of imperfect condition. I'll say that again. Pain, for example, is a consequence of imperfect conditions. It is the signal of the sentinel that warns us of the enemy, and how those faithful sentinels stand in the outworks of the body to guard the more vital parts from approaching danger. It is necessary to warn us, or we should do most foolish thing. as a child might. But for this warning of pain, thus his hand is in the fire, and have it consumed. The soul's health is continually protected by this warning signal of pain, mental and corporeal. Pain is necessary then to the development of consciousness and the perfecting of conditions. It is the reminder that there is something wrong, therefore something to be remedied. It is a part of the process in our education. Also, the loftiest pleasures of our spiritual life continually flower from a rootage in the deepest pain. I am not here to preach a gospel of the blessingness of suffering for the poor and needy, the victims of this world's laws. But suffering, as I read the book of life, is an incentive to effort. See, the suffering that takes place in your life is to spur you on to not do that, to move forward. It's an incentive. I don't want to do that. That's wrong, such and such. And the greatest pressure from without will sometimes evolve the strongest character from within by evoking the greatest force of effort. As Shakespeare points out, the flowers of March are not so fine as the flowers of June, but the finest flower of March is finer than the finest flower of June. It has overcome more opposition and turned it to its account, turned it to account. In other words, the one that's been pressured, put down, such and such, will eventually, with that, will become a better person. You see, it follows that pain itself must pass away as these conditions are perfected, and we are here to improve and perfect them. God does not destroy the devil of pain right off by working a miracle at a moment's notice. For God is not that automation of the sets that weathercock atop of the creation, whether they suppose will veer around at every breath of selfish prayer. You are called upon to ascertain what is the law of the case, who is the lawbreaker, and how is the law to be kept. You must look out for natural consequences and effects that follow causes, not for rewards and punishments. You know that a little bile in the blood may cause great mental distress, but it is perfectly absurd to ask God to save you from these blacks in your eyes and blue devils in your brain. You must look to your liver and obey the law of health, eschew tobacco and take less whiskey or coffee. All in case may be God's works no immediate miracle in response to your offer of tempting opportunity. You see, people do all kinds of stupid things, and they want God to get them out of the problem. Well, sorry, folks, that isn't the way it works. If you're an alcoholic, you need to stop drinking. If you are doing smoking, or you doing anything of this, and then he's just saying, if you're doing harm to other people by lying to them or stealing from them, you see. But he's talking about simply is you suffer because simply is you're eating certain wrong foods or whatever, and we do suffer that way. Many people are suffering right now because of eating the wrong types of foods and causing harm to themselves. He intends man to get rid of evil as he grows enlightened enough to deal more wisely with our human condition in the process of what? Of becoming manlier and womanlier. In other words, you got to pick up the ball and run with it. You see, our science grasps with his transforming hand, makes real half the tales of fairyland. It turns the deadliest better to perfume. It gives decay new life and rosy bloom. It changes filthy rags to virgin white, makes pure in spirit what was foul to sight. You see, people want to blame the outside forces, but in reality, um, that's what you got to be. You got to be toughen up. You got to take it. You got to, like I said, pick up the ball. You got to take the responsibility to deal with certain things. That's why people suffer. And many think simply that's God's responsibility to take away that when you actually are out there being an alcoholic or doing all kinds of, or you're stealing or whatever, you got caught. You want God to get you out of this, that. No, you are responsible to do what's right. You see? And not to beg God to quote unquote get you out of the situation when you created the situation in the first place. You see? That's part of the learning process here. And I don't know if that's a good way of saying learning process, but it is a way for you to wise up. We burn the darkness and the density out of earthly matter and transfigure it into glass, which we can see through. We're here to apply a similar process of annealing to our dense, unexcavating earthly humanity, so that the light from heaven may shine through it purely. We are here to try and clear away these visible causes of obstruction which have been bequeathed to us by ages on ages of horrible ignorance, and not look forward helplessly to their being burned out of human souls by eternity of hellfire or backward, for a salvation supposed to have taken place some 18 centuries ago, but which is is no nearer now than it ever was. Of course not. Of course not. It's a lie. Stinking lie. On the terms set forth by Orthodox teaching, Orthodox is supposed to be truth, but in reality, they don't teach that, do they? It is your responsibility to figure that all out. That's what this is about. You are a spiritual being. Stop copping out on your responsibility. It was impossible to see anything clearly or get any glimpse of justice above or below, in heaven or hell or earth, under the old creed, which proclaims that pain and suffering constitutes the curse wherewith God has unjustly afflicted all for the sin of one. Instead of the beneficiary, through stern angel of his presence and bearer of his blessing, that it was a eternal decree to be executed through all eternity, instead of a awakening in time that calls to action now at once for the changing of the present condition in which humanity crawls, as it were, upon all fours or hobbies or on crutches, or hobbits on crutches, as if we were born mental cripples. We all know there is an awful deal of suffering in the world that cannot be considered as a mere individual question. Sufferings that we do not individually cause and are not personally responsible for. Sufferings bequeathed to us as individuals and members of the state. But we have to bear the accumulated burdens of centuries on centuries of ignorance, or worse still, a willful crime, and worst of all, a wrong made sacred by religious sanctions and unsupported by law and the press. And the burden of the many crushes the individual to the earth. Do you understand? It is your responsibility to use your brain and understand things, not to cop out. And the God of justice appears to be blind to this case, makes no rush to the rescue, even when we suffer for the sins of others. Be sure even these can be turned to eternal account, but he has this lesson to convey to the world. Humanity is one. And the power that it has instituted certain laws that operate for the species rather than the individual. An important distinction to be made in interpretation of nature. Laws that deal with the species as one in spite of our manifold diversities and our deified doctrine, everyone on his own book, everyone on hookumism. He does not put forth his hand to take you off your hook when it happens to run into your particular sharp flesh or soul and makes you supplicate or swear. Establish what private relationships you can with your maker and derive what spiritual succor you may whilst bearing the burden or wriggling on the iron that enters you. The laws that do deal with humanity is the aggravative and operate for the good of the species will go grinding on with their larger revolutions that subserve eternal interests while crushing terribly many smaller claims of individual life. For mark this, the eternal intents to show us that humanity is one, and the family are more than the individual member. The nation is more than the family, and the human race is more than the nation. And if we do not accept the revelation lovingly, do not take to the fact kindly, why then it flashed upon us terribly by lightning of hell. If we will not have it by light of heaven, and the poor neglected scum and cancut, candidate of the nations rise up mightily in the strength of disease and prove the oneness of humanity by killing you with the same infection. It has recently been shown how the poor of London do not live, but fester in the pestilence hovers called their homes. To get into these, you have to visit courts which the sun never penetrates, which are never visited by a breath of fresh air, and which never know the virtues of a drop of cleansing water. Immorality is but the natural outcome of such a devil's sprawling ground. The poverty of many who strive to live honestly is appalling. It is. The poverty of many who strive to live honestly is appalling. And this disclosure is made with the customary moan that such people attend neither church nor chapel, as they were the Pancras. I should not wonder if these revelations result in the building of more churches and chapels and the consecrations of at least one or two more bishops. The Bishop of Bedford said the other day, quote, "It was highly necessary that in these times when the poor have so little earthly enjoyment, the joys of heaven should be made known to them." End quote. It is not possible to caricature an utterance so grotesque as that. You see what it's saying? It's amazing. Anyway, how appalling unjustly seems that the victims of this world's laws should be handed over as ready-made victims of natural laws, that the most helpless poor should be the favorite thriving ground for tapeworms just because they are in such poverty. This is hard, but so is it. So it is. It is. And so it will and must be till the lesson is learned and applied that the human family is one and all are bound up together by certain laws willy-nilly, that we are our brother's keeper for all our Cain-like questionings of the fact. We cannot shirk our responsibilities, and you are not allowed to you're not allowed to get out of the grip of the violator law of the whole. The reason why mankind suffers is because simply he has no knowledge of who he is, and he continues to wallow in stupidity. Everything around you is to keep you from that, folks. That's what this is all about. I'm not saying is, but you see what's going on. And this is not, this is what he's saying, but the point simply is everybody makes excuses, you see. I do too, you see. And this is not a judgment call here. This is not what this is about. It has nothing to do with that. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to evolve. We're supposed to get smarter and better and help each other instead of actually do other things to other people and cause harm. It has nothing to do with the Bible, folks. Okay? It has nothing to do with Jesus, God, whatever, what he's saying. If we are also, if it is we who create the fevers to feed on the poor. When we allow others to get rich by permitting the filth and the poisoned air, water that are sent into the world sparkling with purity. When we allow the rights of property to override the interests of humanity. It is we who breathe the disasters of diseases and literally invent the hungry mouth tapeworms that get the living out of the poverty, stricken blood and hungry tummies, and churning this slime of gnawing emptiness because we create or continue. The laws that doom the many to poverty and its parasites of prey. And those are the very top, in a way, I'm just saying something, at the very top, just continue to do this. The well-to-do, whatever, and then they prey upon you, so to speak. Now, I don't always agree with all he's saying too. I see some things that basically, because he was a social reformer too. I don't know if people know that or not. Providence that is very, but I also understand simply is it is our responsibility to do good to other people, not to do evil. Providence is that it is very comprehensible name. Providence does not create poverty. The, the cupola of heaven overhead is like the inverted horn of everlasting plenty, pouring down its blessings, abundance in sunshine and shower, and air and dew, in ripening fire and purifying frost, and the harvests never fail the world over. All round, always, there is plenty for all. If not in one country, there is another. There is no failure on the part of Providence, the creator of plenty. The galactic garden of our world, which has its every element of paradise, is rightly planted and properly tended, has been left to run the weeds of sin and ignorance and crime in the most wasted way. Heavens of spirit worlds round us are forever sowing the divine seed germs broadcast over our earth, and they have to scatter a harvest in order that we may grow a single grain, because the human conditions are so unreceptible. The fields are so neglected, the soil so unprepared to receive their bounty. The heavens round us are even ready to pour out blessings in a larger measure than we are to make a lap for receiving them. All they ask are the conditions under which we may receive much abundantly. We are the manufacturers of misery. We have sedulously cultivated or permitted all manner of foul conditions, and then, in the midst of some calamity for which we are criminally responsible, that comes home to all, the praying machine of the state is set rotating with a furious 40,000 persons power, and God is implored to stay his hand or work a miracle forthwith on behalf of his poor human worms, who ask the Creator to take particular notice of these our penitent writings at his feet. The Bishop of Truro said recently that we are approaching a perfect period of pain and peril, and the situation calls for strong words and strong prayers. You must cry aloud, or you must cry aloud, or the Lord won't hear you. What kind of gibberish is that? Standing face to face with certain facts, the result of things as they are and have been, the atheist exclaimed, "There is no God." End quote. If there was an omnipotent God, such things would not be tolerated by him. End quote. But by an quote omnipotent God, end quote, it meant a God with power to change at a moment's notice. All that is fixed forever, you see. Let me assure our free thought friends that evolution necessitates a new idea altogether of the operative power. It abolishes the incompetent personal creator of the Hebrew Genesis, but in presence of evolution it is useless to demand that, if there be a God, it shall prove itself to be the deity of the Orthodox, which, as I said before, is a sort of an eternal weathercock on the summit of creation that may be made to veer round as it blows about by every breath of selfish human prayer. If people collect together in sufficient numbers to blow it around, a vain idea of divinity, whosoever entertains it, the deity who is belabored so unmercifully, and I think so cheaply, by Robert Insull, is the God of the non-evolutionary theory of creation, the impossible monster of the past. Quote, did God govern America when it had 4 million of slaves? End quote, asked Ingersoll. Well, why not? In accordance with the laws of evolution, seeing that slavery had come to an end, if he had put an end to it, extra, Americans could not have had the credit of doing the work and might never have evolved the consciousness that slavery was criminal. God did not put an end to slavery as an outside governor of men, but who shall say that the power, the will, the perception, the affection, of whatever we can express by analogy with the human that is called God was not operative, and therefore governing within the souls of the men who rose up foremost in revolt against the accused wrong, and called upon the fellows to cast it out. Possibly the existence of God then does not depend upon the particular visible way of working that may be so easily indicated. Slavery only existed pro tem to come to an end and therefore was consistent, like other educational forms of evil, with the divine government according to the laws of evolution. The argument of the non theist is continually directed and limited to the false premises and inadequately conclusions of the orthodox, which is easy and cheap to pulverize as it is to pummel a sack of straw. We can know nothing of an omnipotent God who plays fast and loose with the conditions of law. Were it so, all human foothold and trust in the stability of the universe would be gone. Education would be impossible. We are first taught by means of the fixed facts in order that we may found on solid earth, not on the ever-shifting sands with prayers for God to catch them now and again and keep them quiet for God's sake. I rather think it would be more just to reply, there is not a sufficient manhood and intelligence in you to put an end to the evils you deplore. Quote, I, God, gave the earth for all, end quote, and you permit the initiative inquiry of absolutely private property in land, whereby one man may clutch a county all to himself and a few may claim a country. You allow the rights of property to overrule and override the interests of humanity. If your national property is doubling every 30 years, so it is the national property. You allow the, quote, one, end quote, to possess the soil and the thousands to be driven off and exported as refuge in order that game may multiply and as human parasites of earth may pursue their savage sport. I gave the land for all to be the property and grazing around of each living generations brought to birth, and you allow it to be locked up by the dead hand of the past for the benefit of the few. These few frame the laws that inevitably doom the many, sooner or later, into poverty. Have you noticed that? You see how here's for example, this is not what he said, how they, the control the money. Well, how do you control the money? Well, if you want to inflate it, you keep printing them. You see, you keep printing the paper. You see, you just keep printing it, so it becomes more and more worthless. If you don't, and print less of it, it becomes more valuable. That's not rocket science. That's just the strict facts, folks. You see, sorry, I have to speak out and say something here, because people are so stupid that they won't think. They're afraid. They're in fear. But that's not what that's just an example. You see, these few frame the laws that do. Okay, I'm sorry, I got into that part here. All of which get mixed up with a supposedly inscrutable origin of evil, other grotesque and foulest views, endorsed and inculcated by the current theology for the benefit of persons and patrons. Yes. Which are only fit to be made a mock of and to be laughed into oblivion. And here let me say that while recognizing the inexorability of the natural law in certain spheres of operation, which it works like the bound Samson of blind force for the good of the species. I find that spiritualism introduces a consciousness again, at least equal to the human, into the working of law in a realm beyond the immediate visible. It shows the existence of subtle forces and modes of law for dealing with man, the individual, and a culminating consciousness of creation. When the mind of man had been evolved on this earth, remember, a new factor was introduced among the natural forces, one that was destined to greater modify and counteract them, feather the fire and ride the ocean waves, guide the lightning and train it to carry messages, bridge the planetary spaces and outstrip time itself. In like matter, the knowledge of existence beyond the visible presence, no matter by what means, and of intelligence operating in hidden and extraordinary ways, introduces a new factor among the forces now to be reckoned with as mental modifiers in certain domains of law. The unseen world can no longer be the same when we learn that intelligence is there. No more than this world could remain the same after the advent of man. And when we can identify the consciousness there as being akin to the human here, We know all that is necessary for putting a conscience into the previous exorbitant law, and an eye into the in the eye in the image of blind force. Here we get a margin that would take a long while to fill in with possible annotations. Man is no longer alone in the universe. There are other intelligence, affections, powers of will and work besides his. And in relation to him, this must just makes all the difference in the manifestation and interpretation of the laws that is blind and inexorably in its lower range. We begin to distinguish here are the means for a possible response to invocation and to the need of mental help. The now demonstrated fact of thought let's see, hold on a second here. The now demonstrated fact of thought's transference, which was familiar enough before, in common with other kindred phenomena to many of us, opens up a vista of immortal possibilities in the mode of mental manifestation and the modification of supposed hard and fast or immutable law in relation to life in its higher phases. It seems to me that this fact alone turns the ground of mere materialism into a kind of Goodwin sands. We extend this thought transference upward or around us by means of living telegraphically mental lines, the operators on which at one end can work and only work according to the conditions of the other end. At present, I do not perceive and cannot pretend to know when where we can touch conscious source itself along these lines. Who does know anything of God in the domain of things, or who has any right to pretend to know, or to be paid a salary for pretending to know anything of God personally or a personal God? To me, the question as the personality of God is altogether premature. I can wait for a few future lifetimes to find out God. In a sense, it may be there is no God yet, but there's one coming, end quote. And you will find the saying a profound one if you think it over for a month. We ourselves on the race to man are only in the condition of becoming. In brackets here, let us cultivate a becoming modesty in brackets, and such is the human apprehension of the cause of becoming. The eye, as Goethe has said, can only see what it brings with it the power of seeing, and so, in a sense, a God is not yet, but one is coming. The deity Hinto sets up for worship is more or less an effigy of the God of primitive or savage man. If that be a true likeness, why then men ought not to become atheists merely. They ought not to marry and propagate, but commit suicide for wit. It is such an outrage on all human feelings, this primitive portrayal of eternal power, that the moral result is certain, and the mental result is atheism. I assert that non-theist is sometimes, and in some natures, the necessary revolt of the most inner consciousness against the abortion called God. They shut their eyes altogether to get rid of a representation so unsightly and unworthy, and better is such blindness than much false seeing. I say it in the real presence operating within that is at war with the hideous sham set up for worship without. I seldom use the name of God myself in speech or writing now. It has been so long taken in vain, so profane by the orthodox blasphemers. It has been so degraded as a brand and hallmarked, made use of the warrant or to warrant the counterfeit wares that are passed off upon the ignorant and unsuspecting who think them genuine so long as they are stamped with their name, as to have become quite discredited. For myself, I have come to appreciate a conscious source of all that is working outwardly from the core of things by means of what we term matter and understand as the laws of evolution. A conscious source of all. I cannot state the consciousness in words, but it appears to me that this is the work of phenomena which do actually state in it the process of appealing to or becoming the consciousness in us. But I am utterly unable to persify this power. Also, I find the essence of the whole matter is sacred to privacy. The more in intuition, the less blabbing. The more reverence, the more reverence. The facts of an abnormal or extraordinary nature that came under my own cognizance during many years of my life, which was continually occurring and verified, proved to me that mind exists and operates out of sight. By degrees, these facts people the unknown void with life and intelligent beings that finally gave one bit of foothold on the very first step of a ladder which will stand up for the first time when one tries to prop it against the sky. That one step bridges the dark void of death for me. I don't trouble myself for myself about the other world at all. That's all right if we are. It is for this world people need to be helped. Life is not worth living if we are not doing something towards helping on the work of this world. It is only in helping others that we can truly help ourselves. And we have reasons to think that myriads of those who have already left this life with false hopes of salvation are only too glad to help themselves by coming back and helping us to carry on the work of this world. It is only when we pass out of the domain of self that the unseen helpers can steal in upon us and help us as agents for those who are agents for others, and on until the whole vast universe is filled and quick with modes and motions and forms of being, all afterward with subtly related life, all radiating from central sources to uttermost limit, all unified in one eternal consciousness, in which the soul of man, full statured and full summoned, may possibly become conscious that it touches God at last as a present, a power, a principle, and may then be made aware that it did so unconsciously from the first. Our Orthodox teachers in the present are respectable for playing into the hands or class of the devil that was created for them in the past. Just a second here. They are the conceptors of all the ignorance, robbery, and wrong. In England, the sinister army of 40,000 men in masses, as it has been truly termed, is paid from the national revenue to act the part of a secret Sunday police. Their chief representatives are the obstructiveness of sane and humane legislation today as ever. A man can't marry his wife's sister because of them. At the debate of the Pigeon Bill in the House of Lords some time since, not a single bishop was found to lift up his voice on behalf of the poor, dumb, and miserable murdered doves. Not a man was to be found behind any one of the aprons. Every bishop present in the House voted against opening the museum and picture galleries on Sunday. They said, in effect, if you want to come to church, damn you. You shan't go anywhere else if we can help it. So in other words, we're not going to. I understand this. So you see the power there. They want to stand just where they have always stood, at the end of the long, dark passage through which mankind slowly emerges out of darkness into day, in the very interest of the light, to shut out the face of heaven itself from those who are groping their way through the gloom, and bid them, in God's name, to go back and religiously keep to the obscurity of the cave, if they would be saved. That's from Plato. He's talking about the cave. Each Sunday, they trail the red herring across the scene of their fathers so that their attention may be drawn off from this world and all the wrongs we're sent here to remedy. They promise that those who remain sufficiently poor and worm-like in spirit during this life shall rise erect from the grub-like conditions in death, full-fledged to soar as winged angels in the next life. It's always promise of something in the future, never in the now, so to speak. They have exalted the lot of Lazarus as a scriptural idea for the most part, for the most needy and miserable to live up to, as if the cowering outcast and disease starving of earth were the proper model man for the heavens. They keep up the lying farce of insisting that man is a fallen creature and persist in preaching their doctrine of his degradation and damnation in order that people may go to them to be saved and pay well for it. Yeah, they do pay for it, folks, in many ways. It's a complete brainwashing tool. The secularists assert that the Orthodox cult and theology are a hopeless failure for this world, and as spiritualists, I affirm that they are also a fraud for the other. False beliefs are and forever must be opposed to all real and true doing, and these false beliefs have from the beginning been bitterly opposed to every truth revealed by science, and every advance made for humanity has had to be made in spite of them. Moreover, this doctrine they teach are saving yourself and quote devil take the hindermost end quote, and most miserable, degrading to any true sense of real manhood or womanhood. He wouldn't be much of a hero who is in the midst of the battle, took it into his head that the first duty of man is to get himself saved. They get up a horrible huckaboo in the rear, and it's all hell were let loose after you, on purpose to frighten the blind and foolish and make them rush through the one door open in front of those who are fleeing from the wrath to come, at which they take tax and toll, but there is no hell, there is no devil, close after hinmost of those who are furiously fleeing from the avengers of the fall of man. End quote. Moreover, it is of no use rushing, however fast you go, you're carried your own heaven or hell inside of you, whether for this life or any other. All this is a bogus business with the mythology devil for boogery. This world is not yet on fire with the final conflagration, nor can they set it on fire with the painful flames of a pictorial hell. A little girl was once asked what she must first do to be saved, and the innocent replied, quote, get lost, end quote. Moreover, before we join in the stampede of self-salvation at the call of those who cry, quote, fire, end quote, when the theater is crammed, let us be sure that we have grown a soul that is worth saving. If we had, I doubt whether we should manifest such a consuming anxiety of elderly selfishness or be in such a infernal hurry to get it saved anyhow. Those who are truly desirous of saving or helping others seldom trouble much about their own souls. There is the burden of a noble care. There is a loftier inquietude than any sense of self can ever give. They lose all such unworthy fears for themselves in the thought of others. They are like that grand capture of the quote North Fleet, end quote, of whom I proudly wrote some years ago. Quote, others he saved the name, unsettled that he give his wife, and dying with so pure a aim, he had no need to save his life, end quote. And remember now, he is a poet, so he puts poetry in his books here. I also hold their other cowardly doctrines that a vicarious sacrifice to be the real, if indirect, cause of vivisection. It would have been impossible for a nation of animal lovers like the English to tolerate the vivisection of the dog, for example, man's first friend in the wilderness of the early world, his ally in the work of civilization, unless the motor nerve and conscience of the race had been paralyzed by the current of vicarious suffering. The beastly cruelties of its practitioners, which are flaunt in our faces with intent to terrorize the conscience of others, could not have been permitted by men who had not been indoctrinated by the worship of victisection deity, whose victim was his own son. And this mirage of slowly murdering dogs and rabbits, cats and frogs cannot have the consolation of knowing that vivisection is salvation, and they are saviors of the human race from the consequences of its own crimes against nature and sins against self. It is impossible to establish the throne of eternal justice by the violation of all that is human, as is fruitlessly attempted on this ground of the Orthodox creed. It is impossible for you to save or serve humanity by sacrificing all that constitutes the essence of humanity, as is done in this portrayal of a vivisection deity, who is the responsible operator with his own son for suffering victim. And this victim of vicarious punishment is held forth as a lure to draw humanity towards a Father in heaven of such a nature as that. We may depend upon it that this preaching of what is called Christianity to get a Sunday sensation or solace out of it, this plunging of the theological poker red hot into your seventh-day dose of spiritual flip to give it a zest. This using of hellfire as a persuader, after the manner of the furnace heated beneath the turkeys, which persuaded the poor things to dance to music played in quick time. This weekly whipping of the devil round the stump is, as the Americans say, pretty well played out. There's nothing new to be said. Suppose we go to work and try to do something instead of making ourselves miserable on Sunday, doing nothing but putting ourselves through all the postures, I should say, and postures of the Orthodox sabbatical fashion. In future, mankind will not herd together, I should say, like terror-stricken cattle in a thunderstorm to deprecate the wrath of their God and offer him praise and presence by way of propitiation as a bribe for him not to lose his temper. Good God! What an idea of a God! It's precisely the elementary God of Browning's Calvin, Caliban, and of the primitive savages. In future, I say, men will not look upon it as sacred duty to herd together on purpose to praise and glorify their God one day in seven with their psalm of conceit. Quote, let all creation hold its tongue while I uplift my Sunday song. End quote. Being a jealous God, he should blight their harvest or peradventure burst their boiler of excursion train. Nor will men from leagues, religions, or otherwise, on purpose to think alike and make all other people think the same. They cannot think sorry, they cannot think alike if they are ever to grow. The lower the type, the greater the likeness. The loftier the development, the larger diversity. That is the natural law. We may cooperate to work, but not to think alike. That could never be free thinking, nor will mankind henceforth allow their arms to be paralyzed for action by being fixed or, quote, veiled up in the posture of prayer. We say it is a farce, a pitiful one, not a laughable one, for you to pray for God to work a miracle for the kingdom of heaven to come when you are doing all you can all your lives to prevent it coming, or doing nothing to hasten it coming. It is a serious mockery of God and man. You were sent here to create the kingdom, to work it out by living that law of love proclaimed as laying down the life in love for others. And the very reason why the kingdom does not come and cannot come is because you stand in the way of its coming. And you and all who think and act as you do, praying for the better day to come, must be swept out of the way in order that it may come. Get up from your knees and work for it. Take your weapon in hand and fight for it. Turn fiercely on the devil that dogs out our own footsteps and rescues those that fall by the way, and succumb to the powers that make for evil. Turn on the devil, not theoretically, but practically, having ascertained the work that needs to be done. Turn on the devil, not singly, but associated together for doing, instead of believing and talking and praying for God to do. What the eternal worker asks of us, as I apprehend the whole matter, is that we shall become conscious co-workers with him in carrying out the divine purposes in proportion as we can make them over. He does not want us to be fear-bound and devil-driven slaves, nor beasts in blinkers, nor laggers behind, forever probed by the goat of sheer and sharp necessity, not blind obeyers of his stemmest laws that go grinding on willy-nilly, hauling and hurling us along with them in their incest. Vast revolution, but seers of his work, intelligent interpreters of his will, and sharers in the life and love that is. In conclusion, there is no origin of evil in the moral domain that is not derivable, I should say, from ignorance. Quote, the wickedness of a soul, end quote, says Hermes, quote, is its ignorance, end quote. And there is no devil in the moral domain except in the devilish determination to do the wrong or permit the wrong to be done after we have evolved the consciousness that recognizes the right. The reason then why God does not kill the devil is because man has unconsciously created or permitted all that is the devil finally, and hereafter he has to consciously destroy his own work and fight himself free from the errors of his own ignorance, not man, the individual merely, but man as part of the whole family of universal humanity, not man as not man as mortal simply, but as a immortal. standing up shoulder to shoulder and marching onward step by step and side by side with those who are our elders in immortality and who still unite with us and lend a hand to effort in time and not altogether inscrutably, but slowly unfolding the purpose of the eternity. And that is the end of the chapter tonight. And so thank you for being here. So we're going to end it right here. So appreciate everyone who's been here. Again, I may do another video. I don't know tonight or not. This was about an hour and 41 minutes. So I appreciate each one here. I ask that this is the sternness of Gerlad Massey. Gerlad Massey is an unbelievable person. Most are not aware that he was born enormously poor. I mean, really poor folks. The family was poor, and eventually he was at a very young age. I don't know if it was 8 years old, or 9, or even maybe less than that. He worked in a factory, a plant. This is in the 1800s, and those plants were downright dirty, folks. And so he eventually went to another particular plant and thought it would be better, and it was actually worse than the one he went to, the first one. And what he was making, the money was basically being given to his parents to kind of somewhat for them to survive. And eventually he had the opportunity somehow, what I understand, to get to London. And he got to London and he educated himself. He basically did a lot of self-talking, he taught himself certain things and he learned. And he apparently, was amazing, his life changed. And that's his background. He was an uneducated child. He never went to school as a kid. The parents didn't have the money or could afford it. I should say money, but couldn't even provide for him, much less anything else. So he was desperately poor. And this is what happened to him. He became a very educated man and he taught himself. And eventually he ran into people at a museum in Egyptology. He is an unbelievable Egyptologist, okay, for his time. He happened to be at the right time in the right place, you see. And the guy's brilliant. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1907, but he had a student. I don't think it was formal, but he had a student here in America, which was Alvin Boyd Kuhn, which I learned much from him. And what I understand simply is that Gerlad Massey was also in the Theosophical Society. I don't know if he was in the Theosophical Society, but he was a Theosophicalist. And so was also Alvin Boyd Kuhn. So these guys are not what you call, there's a lot of play on Madame Blavatsky, but these guys were not in that limelight. They were simply doing their thing, and their gifts were being used. So anyway, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. I wish you a good night. And again, like I said, may you have the ears to hear, eyes to see, that that your heart will see the truth. Okay. All right. Splendid. Have a good night. Take care.